AAA games today look very different to the ones that came out 20 years ago. But do they look better? Lots of people would say no. I've seen a lot of videos on this topic recently, and having just worked for the last 4 years in the games industry, I feel like I can bring a bit of a fresh perspective to this conversation. And the reality is, for many, things just don't feel the same as they used to. But I'd like to think there's more to this, and that players might shoulder a little bit more blame than most believe. Let's take a deeper look at the problem. Greed is the easy answer, the low-hanging fruit, and sure, in many situations it is the only answer. Games have grown from a $7 billion industry in the early 2000s to one worth over $200 billion today. You can't have this type of growth without more nefarious types trying to take advantage, or even avoiding the typical consequences of a booming industry with more investors and migration to corporate structures and practices. But the issue is far more complicated than that, and greed doesn't tell the whole story. The games market is growing, and that's a great thing for the industry. Whether you love, hate, or are indifferent to mobile gaming, it has been a fantastic driver for the growth of games audiences, led largely by the huge number of new types of players it has brought into the game space. This has by and large been a gateway for older gamers and also opened up a more accessible and less intimidating pathway for the less typical gamer stereotype. This has been a great maturation for the market. More types of players exist than ever before, and gaming is no longer resolved to lurk in the shadows of entertainment media. Or, well, at very least the stigma is improving slowly. And as a result, there is more untrodden ground for genre-bending titles and new ways to play open for developers to explore than ever before. But with such a strong pathway to games existing through the mobile market, for many of these new players, the only world of games they know is the free-to-play monetization world. And therefore, they have a much higher tolerance for these types of business strategies. We are seeing more and more of this tolerance bleed across to the core games market. One significant change in the games industry over the last decade has been the rise of product and marketing-driven roles within games teams. Coinciding with the explosion of free-to-play mobile titles, a whole new world of access to player behavior was unlocked with data. The mobile games market definitely taught us how to analyze players on a micro level, to both help us understand what aspects of a game resonate with our audience, which is incredibly valuable, but also for financial, where we can start to model out behaviors, user segments, and patterns to help determine the optimal points to drive purchase conversion from players. And then the more core gaming titles learn this too. As technology allowed, more games became live service, chasing the lucrative nature of larger spending depths within a title. Spending depth being the total lifetime amount a single user could spend in your game. Typically, the minimum threshold for this that a game strives for will be around about $1,000. So, as on mobile, AAA studios were now able to optimize their monetization over time, learning from player behavior to refine their in-product offerings, and learning the best methods to create value and drive conversion. And thus, that was the rise of the AAA live service industry. Fortnite has now become the gold standard of the modern game. True cross-platform, live service, ever-evolving world, a huge spending depth for players with thousands of skins, IP tie-ins, and honestly a pretty fair and sustainable monetization layer. So sure, this type of thing is likely here to stay. It's hard to walk away from this kind of monetary potential, particularly when the earn-back rate of games is quite low and many people's livelihoods depend on a game succeeding. But to execute on the vision of ambitious live service titles like Fortnite costs an enormous amount of money. And for that reason, above all else, the big elephant in the game development room is the cost and risk associated with making games, and particularly big games. Studios need to find levers to recoup their investment as soon as possible. Typically, studios and publishers are looking to recoup their total investment into a game within the first 12 months. So it's no wonder games business models are optimized around ongoing service and spending opportunities just to try to minimize the risk. And you could argue that studios have an obligation to do whatever they can to recoup this investment for the sake of their team's jobs and careers. On top of this, games also now live in the land of what I like to call known spaces. There are more games being released than ever before and more channels you can find them through. And all of this adds up to a heightened competition and heightened difficulty to find an audience, putting more pressure on this recoupment exercise. And if we pull back outside of games, this isn't something unique to the game space, but something we've seen repeated again and again in different creative industries. Take one look at film and TV, and you'll notice a trend towards established IP, sequels, and remakes, and away from more experimental one-off films and new IP. This is for all the same reasons as the games industry has seen. It's a known space, they have data on these audiences, they can more accurately forecast its performance, and they know what works and sells for that type of film, and they can more reliably guarantee when and how they'll recoup their investment. So, do modern games actually suck? Well, not necessarily all of them. Sure, things aren't going back to the way they were 20 years ago. That cat's already out the bag, and as long as audiences are buying, AAA will stay this way. But there is something that brings hope. A lot of this need for high cost is driven by market expectation around where the quality bar needs to be. AAA is supposed to be at the cutting edge, and being at the cutting edge is really expensive. AAA teams have become enormous, and development times are ballooning to often in excess of 5 years, which is what's putting games in this $250 million plus region for cost to market. So, with little movement in box cost, something had to give to transform how revenue comes into a studio. And the trigger point came in the form of live service monetization and content strategies, and also a life within the safety and knowns of IP and tried and true game loops and systems. At this point, if you're going to invest this much into making a game, you want to be sure that you can get revenue from it for years to come. Although, the pursuit of everything being live service is a bit of a red herring. In reality, it backfires for many studios that pursue it, because it's so challenging to get audiences to migrate across to a new title like this. And if this isn't going to change, the change for consumers needs to come from their own expectations. I'm going to posit this, and maybe this is controversial, but the indie games of today are the AAA games of yesteryear. With massively increased access to game development tools, we've actually never seen more games and more interesting ideas than we do today. Indie developers will never compete on fidelity and depth that you find in AAA games. What they can compete on is innovation. The innovation is what pushes these games through the crowd when they can't rest on IP like the big players. If you're looking for the cutting edge and you want to be impressed by a spectacle with lots of structured gameplay, AAA is still there and it's delivering on this in spades. But maybe be prepared to have to spend a little more on these games in the near future. And we still want titles to be pushing for the cutting edge, because that's how technology improves. However, if you're looking to be surprised, and for high-risk innovation, or for something that carries a little bit more soul, jump into the indie world. We're well past the days of good indie games being few and far between. It's a simple reframing of perspective that's needed for an audience of players that are asking what happened to the games they love. And the answer is, they never left. They just changed shape.